meeting you right where you are on your foster care journey. This is the Forgotten Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Forgotten Podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Cabe, and I am so happy to be with you. If you are part of the foster care community, passionate about serving, or simply interested in learning more, we are here for you. In every episode of this podcast, you will hear stories from men and women who have experienced foster care to one degree or another. They may have grown up in the system, are caseworkers, foster parents, or others who are here to bring you hope or encouragement. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe and share it with a friend. And remember, you are not alone. I hope you enjoy the Forgotten Podcast. Jenn, I am so happy to have you back on the podcast. It has been a little while, and it's just always great to talk with you. I mean, you're a dear friend, dear partner in ministry, but super excited to talk. And I want to give our listeners just a bit of context. I'm talking with Jenn Hook. Jenn is the author of Thriving Families, which is a brand new book, a trauma-informed guidebook for the foster and adoptive journey. She is also the author of Replanted and the director and founder of Replanted Ministries. Jenn, give us a little more context. What else should we know before we dive in?
Yeah, I mean, I love coffee. I'm a Canadian. No.
Yeah.
I think before all of that, I was a trauma therapist for kids in the foster care system. So I did counseling with kids as young as 3 to teenagers. And then I also did counseling with birth parents who were trying to reunify with their children as well. That's where my heart was really stirred. And I just saw a need for support for families. And so out of that experience and doing that counseling work, I started Replanted, and then just really a heart to equip families. I saw so many of my parents really struggling to understand trauma and just the uniqueness our kids are going through, and then also being misunderstood as foster parents as well. Yeah. I saw birth parents being villainized, and just really wanted to do something to create empathy and compassion for everyone, understanding the uniqueness of the journey, and then how can we be the best parents possible to help our kids thrive and heal in this journey as well. So that's where my heart came from. And it's been a wild ride. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I love that, Jenn. And we share that same heart just to help people understand and see kind of behind the eyes of the foster care community. And I know you have personally helped me in my own parenting journey, not only through our interviews that we get to share with everybody, but in our own personal conversations. And so I appreciate that. And I thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Absolutely.
Okay, so the cool part about this book too, well, a cool part is that you got to write this with your husband, which he was part of writing. Did you write Replanted also with him?
Yeah.
Okay, so how's that? Talk about that flow. How is it to write with your husband?
Right. I know. I feel like this could be like a make or break, just like conflict or just bonding us, you know?
Yeah.
So, it's actually been really great. Josh is a psychologist, a licensed psychologist and professor, in the state of Texas. He works for the University of North Texas. And he does a lot of research. And so his passion, he's got different areas of expertise, but it's very similarly aligned. And so when we met and my heart was really about supporting foster and adoptive families, he was all in on that. And then just with our therapeutic backgrounds, it was really helpful. So he's a great writer. So it's actually been really awesome. We sit down and talk about the chapter content and whatnot. And, I give him a lot of context, and then he goes for it and drafts it out. And then I go through it and rework it. And so it's actually been a really great experience for us to do together, really bonding and something that we can really share together. It was actually his idea to do the second book, Thriving Families.
Really?
So
Okay.
So if you enjoy it, you're going to have to give him thanks.
That is awesome. Yeah. I wanted to know more about the backstory. So tell us more. It was his idea, but what prompted this book?
Yeah. So I think, we're definitely developing a lot more resources, but 10 years ago when I started Replanted, there was not a lot of books. There was not a lot of content out there. And I saw families really hurting. And really the narrative around adoption and foster care, I think, was really misunderstood as well. And so, families, especially in foster care, I was watching my kiddos just be misunderstood with their trauma and how that manifests emotionally and behaviorally. Foster parents with really good intentions just feeling ill-equipped and giving notice. And then my kids are bouncing from home to home to home. And parents that I'm like, you're great. You're qualified. This is part of the journey. Just feeling like they just had no support, no resources, nothing around them. And so we just felt like we need to do something about this. So the first book, Replanted, does dive into a lot of trauma and things like that. And then we talk about support. Like, what do you need as a parent? What support do you and your family need to set yourselves up for success? But one thing I wanted to do with the next book was, I was seeing a lot of books out there that do cover trauma, how to connect with your child, how does trauma impact the brain and behavior and things like that. But that's only one piece of what families have gone through when they're impacted by adoption and foster care. And there's a whole bunch of other uniquenesses that I felt like we weren't addressing head on and needed to be really transparent about. And so this book dives into, grief and loss that all kids through adoption and foster care have experienced. We talk about the importance of birth families and how to maintain relationships if you're able to do that and it's safe to do so, but that can be a really beneficial thing for a child. We talk about cultural backgrounds and components. If you're a transracial family, it's really important that you honor your child's identity around their cultural identity. And so we need to, we need to press into these hard conversations. And so we just kind of dove deep into stuff that we don't always talk about. How to honor your child's story. How do you do that? How do you talk to them about their story, their background, things that are hard to even maybe bring up, or maybe we don't have the words for? What do we do with that? Just a lot of things like that where parents kind of feel caught off guard a lot. That's what this book is about. So it's awesome. We do talk about trauma behavior. Obviously, that's a big piece of what our kids have been through. We talk about sensory processing stuff, but we take it a layer deeper than I think a lot of other books do when it comes to the foster and adoptive journey. And that's what I was really excited about.
Would you say this book is more of a resource that you can pick up? And is it one of those where you open it up and say, I'm going to choose this topic? Or is it more something you want to read through, in order?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you could do it either way. I would highly recommend reading it through in order because I think the chapters do build on each other. In each chapter, we have a case study, if you will, of, one of my experiences with a child in foster care through Replanted. And so we kind of share, and obviously, for confidentiality, we've changed a lot of the pieces so that nothing's identifying, but there's a lot of really practical stuff in this book. So it's not just here's trauma. It's like, okay, here it is. And then let's do a case study and we're going to walk through a narrative and then how to intervene or how to respond or what we could do as a parent here to help support our children. And so I think if you kind of skip through different chapters or pick what's applicable to you, you might miss things that are applicable to you, but you didn't really fully know it. Yeah, exactly.
Sure. So that's good. Okay, so you kind of just gave an overview, but what is maybe one of your favorite parts about this book?
Oh goodness, that's a hard one, Jamie. I think when I started working as a therapist in foster care, I think I believed that narrative that maybe a lot of us as Christians believed, right? That there was children out there in foster care and orphanages that needed us, that birth parents were bad, that our homes were better, and that the children needed us, And I think we kind of press into that assumption. Now it's not a wrong assumption to have. I'm not trying to blast people that thought that way, but I think, in my experience, I've realized and had my eyes open to the reality that that's not the case. Yeah. And so I think some of my favorite chapters really kind of dive into what does it look like to have a greater empathy and compassion for birth parents, for the kids and what they've experienced, and for yourselves as parents as well. But as believers, what does it look like to look beyond the cause of the fatherless as just adoption and foster care, but as family preservation, as reunification efforts, as forging relationships with birth families that might feel you never thought possible,
Right.
And so we talk a lot about that. I think too, for kids, like grief and loss is always something I've experienced in adoption and foster care. Even if they were adopted at birth, they've lost their first family. If they're in foster care and living in limbo, they've lost their family, what they've experienced. There's always going to be compounded grief there. And so we really talk about like, what does it look like as a parent to come alongside and enter into that with our kids? So that might be one of my favorite things too. I think sometimes as parents, we want to fix.
Yeah.
We want our kids to feel hopeful, encouraged. We don't want to see them sad and discouraged, but that can be so invalidating when somebody steps in when you're hurting, or honoring like, hey, I love you as my parent, but I wonder what my life would have been like if I didn't need to come into foster care, or if my parents had kept me, like these are okay questions. And so I think what I love about the book too is like, we say like, hey parents, it's okay for your kids to ask these questions, and it's okay if you feel a little triggered by it, and don't react to that. We need to be fully present and allow them to have their feelings in this too. And so we do a lot around like what does it look like to be in relationship with birth families? Can we recognize maybe where our own resistance is out of fear, and not necessarily out of a safety concern, things like that. So we press into some hard stuff.
It's really good.
Yeah.
But sorry, you finish up.
Oh no, I think that's all I had there.
Okay. No, I was going to say that this whole idea of fear and being triggered, I think that's so helpful that you address that, because probably if you're not in this foster care adoption world, if you've never heard of like trauma-informed parenting before, I mean, there was a day when I learned about that. It's not like I always knew what this trauma-informed therapy was, right?
Yeah.
Now it feels like it's just part of my vocabulary because I've been in this long enough, but that's not true for everyone. And I think just even to recognize that I might be triggered by them saying, I wonder, or I wish I didn't have to be taken from my family. Understanding that feeling inside of you isn't necessarily the feeling that you don't want to just listen to that feeling and respond. You want to listen to that feeling and go, why am I feeling that way? Exactly. Why is that making me feel so vulnerable right now? I remember a time that I was talking to, this was actually not a child, but talking to a person who was saying something that I was feeling some triggers of inadequacy, then which was leading to me wanting to be critical of this person, all those things. And I just started writing down those feelings. Like we're talking on Zoom, like you and I are. And I just started writing down like these feelings, like you are a failure, or I am feeling this or that. And it was really helpful to me because I was identifying I am actually being triggered and I'm feeling some things, and these aren't true. Right. Like this feeling you are a failure is a feeling and it's not true. And it's making me want to lash out at this person who they've done nothing wrong. This is this is all about me. And so I just think in our parenting, if we can do that as well, which takes time to understand, but we have to be self-aware enough to kind of listen to those feelings, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that self-awareness piece is really key. And like, sorry, I'm going to clear my throat. Quinn, I apologize. I think that self-awareness piece is really key. When I was doing therapy with clients, we would always talk like when you got triggered, that's teaching you and telling you something. And there's such a great opportunity for growth there. And so if your child does say something and you feel triggered and you want to respond with, your parents are terrible, these are all the bad things they've done, that's more about you than what they need in that moment. And so, I think it's really important that parents have those spaces though, where, you see a therapist or a counselor, or you have a support group or fellow foster and adoptive parents where you can say to them, hey, my child shared this and I felt so triggered. These are all the things that came up for me, but they're your people. And so you're not giving it to your kids and trying to shift their narrative or invalidate their feelings in any way, but you have a space where you can just kind of word vomit out all the thoughts and feelings that you've got and be able to work through that. Get feedback then from trusted people that care about you, right? I think that's that's just part of human growth too, I think is really great. You know, we all get triggered by stuff. So
right.
What can that teach us, you know?
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. It's not for us to invalidate our own feelings either.
Right.
It's just where are we going to share those feelings?
Exactly.
Because another way, Jen, to invalidate that child in that scenario, you might not say this person is bad, your parents are bad, but you might say, why do you feel that way? We love you so much.
Right.
You know, which could also be like that makes that child feel shame or guilt for feeling that way.
Yeah. And I can't tell you how many kids in foster care I worked with that felt the tension of like the pull to their birth parents, the pull to their foster parents, and like trying to almost keep everyone happy. Right. And so, and that's hard to navigate as a kid. And so as a parent, when you can just say, you can have all your feelings, it's not going to rock me in any way, but be curious about it. Right. Like, thanks. You know, when we do some of our trainings, I always talk about when someone shares something really vulnerable with you, you should always validate that feeling, right? Like, thank you so much for sharing that with me. That took a lot of courage. I love hearing your heart. I'm glad you felt safe to share that with me. You know, you're always welcome to tell me any of those thoughts and feelings, things like that, right? We want to communicate to our kids, like, I see you, I hear you. It's okay. Don't feel apprehensive about sharing that with me. I can hold your feelings. I can hold my own as well.
That's so good.
But talk, you know, ask more questions too. Can you tell me a little bit more about what's going on for you with that, right? Like show more curiosity. When you can do that with your kids, you're really going to just create an invitation for them to keep sharing more and more and more instead of them feeling like you're not the safe person for them. And they're not having that outlet that they need. You know, that's a really important thing. So yeah, I think, it's hard, right? Because I think what you were mentioning, you don't want to invalidate your own feelings as well, but we can really miss what our kids are communicating if we kind of come in with trying to be encouraging or hopeful or, you know, make them feel better, right? I even, you know, when we do our like support group trainings, one of the things I even discourage my families from asking is, are you okay? Because a lot of times when we ask questions and we're trying to check in with somebody, we ask a question in a way that requires a yes or a no answer. And that's really easy for someone to just say, yeah, I'm fine. Right. But instead, if you can ask an open-ended question, right? How are you feeling about that? That allows for somebody to kind of give their narrative and really share in a way that gets deeper into what's going on for them. So I think as parents, there's a great opportunity to step into your kids' stories in that way if you can be that safe person and then have your safe people too.
Yeah, genuine curiosity. That's so good. And not leading with what you want them to say. I've been at a restaurant before where someone came over, the waiter or whatever, and every time, is food good? Everything good? And I was like, okay. As opposed to like, how is everything going? You know, but it was like, we knew that everything good, everything perfect. Did it come out great? Like,
okay. Yeah, exactly. You know the answer you're supposed to give.
Right. But I could see myself doing that with kids. Did you have a good day at school? You know, I mean, just kind of some of those things just to be aware of what we say and becoming really good question askers.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I am thinking too, Jen, of someone listening who is brand new to this world of foster care. Maybe they just found the podcast. Maybe they this idea of trauma-informed parenting. What? Like, it's just so, they've just not heard it before. Or maybe they've been a foster parent and they're like feeling like, wow, I haven't been doing this in the quote right way. And they're feeling shame or guilt or like, man, I've blown it. What do you say to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think the journey's hard. So the first thing I always want to say is give yourself grace, because I think as parents, it's always easy to look back with hindsight and be like, I wish I could have done it this way. I wish I had known these things. I've messed up my kids forever. I think honestly, parenting is like one of the most judgmental things you'll ever do in your life. And then you're parenting kids with extensive trauma histories that are experiencing grief and loss, and you didn't create this, but you're responding to it, and it's hard. And so I think the first thing is always like, give yourself so much grace, give your kids grace, give their birth parents grace. It's complicated. It's messy. You know, families weren't designed to be broken. We live in a broken world. And so we're responding to something that's really messy. I think when it comes to trauma-informed care, you don't know what you don't know.
Yep.
So I think just as much as when I talk to parents about kids' behavior and a kid has had a full-fledged meltdown for hours, they've destroyed the house and we've recovered from it, we leave it in the past. We don't bring it up again. We're not going to keep reminding that child in the days to come, don't do what you did a few days ago. That's only going to keep instilling deeper shame and embarrassment in them. It's same with parents. You didn't know what you didn't know, or you did, but we're human and we mess up, and that's okay too. We can repair relationships. This is the beauty of being able to step into that. And so being able to model that, I think, is a really great thing. But I think becoming trauma-informed is a really great spot, is a really helpful thing, so you don't feel crazy as a parent. I sat with so many foster parents that were just like, I don't understand what's happening. All right. Like, they're in our home, they're safe. Like, why are they still acting this way?
Sure.
When they first came, everything was great for a couple months, that honeymoon period, and then things got real and it's hard. And I don't think I'm cut out for this. And all those feelings are okay. It's okay to feel like you can't do this, that you're a failure, that you're in over your head. I think trauma-informed care gives us the tools, though, and the resources that we need to step into our kids' messiness and to our own messiness and say, I've got you, and we're going to figure this out together, and we're going to try to experience healing together. I think one thing too that I want to communicate and we talk about in the book is healing isn't this linear process. It's not that kids come into your home and now they're safe. If they, cognitively, they might know they're safe, but they're not going to feel safe for a really long time. But healing is never linear. It's up and down, it's backwards, it's forwards, especially as kids hit different developmental milestones, right? So kids' brains are constantly developing. They're understanding things in different ways. This is why a 5-year-old is not doing algebra yet. They're not capable, Right. And so it's the same thing with their kids' stories. A 5-year-old might have come into your home in foster care and they're working through their trauma, and now they're a preteen and they've had a huge growth development in their brain, and they're understanding their experience in a different way. And they're trying to make sense of it. And so they're reprocessing it. And then as they become adults, they're going to do that again. And so it's very common for kids to feel like you've made progress and then you're on a huge backslide, or they're re-asking these questions again. And so just give yourself, again, grace for that as well, understanding that this is a very big part of development as well. And trauma, adoption and being in safe homes and going to a good school, these things don't heal trauma. It's a relational wound. Right. And so being able to step in and with trauma-informed care and connection and deepening those relationships and creating felt safety and things like that are really going to be what changes and moves the needle for our kids over time.
I really like that perspective on, as they get older and their brains are developing in new ways, they're reprocessing it with that brain. And so, I just think that's really helpful. Because it's almost like a whole new person in a lot of ways, rethinking through, right? Yeah. Thinking in ways they never had before.
Exactly.
And so whereas something when they were 5 impacted them in a certain way, now when they're 10 or 15, that same thing that maybe didn't seem to impact them is now significantly impacting them.
Exactly. And this is why, too, we talk about in the book, like, kids need to know all the pieces of their story before the age of 12. There's a big developmental milestone that kids hit there. As kids go into the teen years, too, they're going to start talking to their teen friends and they're going to look to others for support. That's just kind of a natural individuation that happens, right? As we get older, we want to separate from our parents and become our own individual. But as a parent, you've got all of the information, or as much as you know about your child's story, and they have a right to know that. That's their story. And so we talk to them at developmentally appropriate ways. A 5-year-old, you're going to share a lot differently than a 10 or 11-year-old, but they need to know all of their story before the age of 12, because you're still the primary person in their life that they can process and experience what they've been through with. And so you want to be that person before they go off. It would be really detrimental to a child to not know the fullness of their story, or maybe why their dad's in jail and they haven't been able to see him, and they find out when they're 17. That's going to feel like a betrayal of trust. They're not going to feel like you're the safe person that they can talk to about those things and stuff like that. So it's really, there's some really great opportunities as parents with those milestones that we kind of need to take advantage of.
Yeah. And I want to bring up again, just that grace. Like you said, if you haven't done this yet, if they are older than that, let's just start today. And this is where I find hope as well, is that I am not the savior of my kids. I cannot be the one to bring the ultimate. I can't fix that deep wound or heal that deep wound. Now I can partner with God to do it. But he gets to do the redemptive work in them if they allow him to. And I think that brings me some freedom and some peace as well.
Exactly. Yeah, you're so right about that. That's one of the things we wrote about in the book too, is God loves you more than you know. God loves your kids more than and God loves the birth families more than they know as well. And so, and no one's beyond God's redemptive power and healing. No one's beyond support and cheering for and being an advocate for, and so just kind of putting on the love of Jesus in those scenarios is really, really helpful. And then I think too, you were touching on something, Jamie, like, I think sometimes parents become trauma informed, or, they might read our book and be like, okay, there's so much I want to do now. And it's probably not realistic to do all of it at the same time.
Yeah. That's good.
And so what's something that you can start small with and just slowly introduce into your family dynamic and into your home and your parenting style? I think that's a really good place to start, and slowly kind of shifting or becoming more trauma informed. It's like drinking from a fire hydrant. You can't,
Yeah, it's too much.
It's too much. Yeah. So start small and just, slowly keep shifting over time.
I really like that. In fact, I wanted to ask you, do you feel like being a trauma informed parent is more about what you do or how you do it?
Ooh, that's a good question, Jamie.
I was kind of proud of that question, Jen.
I know. I want to say both, but that feels like a cop-out. So I think I'm going to say how. I think it's the how. A lot of trauma-informed parenting is really about like behavior matching and just showing up with your kids, getting down on their level, connecting with them. So you might know all the tricks, but if you can't maintain a calm voice and face and like meet your kids where they're at, the how is really what's going to help your kids feel safe. We talk in our book about like the Maslow hierarchy of needs. And the first thing is like, your physiological needs, so making sure kids have food and clothing and things like that. But the next one is safety and security. And I think that's really where we get to, that's really where some of that trauma-informed parenting falls in with our kids. And so when you can keep showing up with your kids, maintaining your calm, not trying to enter into their chaos, but showing them, hey, I love you. I see you in the thick of a trauma moment right now, and I'm still here, I think can be really, really important for kids. A lot of our kids that hasn't been modeled to them. They only trust themselves. We talk about this all the time. Trauma impacts the brain, where kids function at an emotionally half their developmental age, but they've got the street smarts of a teen. It's really confusing parenting. And so when you can be that how and just model to them like safety, security, grace, love, unconditionally, they don't have to earn it. They don't have to do anything to prove it. Then I think that's where we start to see our kids shifting.
I love it.
See that trauma brain slowly starting to disengage, and relationship is really formed.
Yeah. And I think that's why it's also super important that we understand that we are loved and that our life is not about performing. We are already loved for who we are. And I think the more that I can parent with the gospel first, as opposed to kids, read your Bibles every day because you're supposed to. Yeah. Instead, I encourage you to read the Bible because I want you to remember how much God loves you. Yeah. And it's all over the Bible. Yeah. I just feel like these are things I've been thinking about a lot, of just that perspective shift and remembering as a parent, as a human, as a child of God myself, that I get to do out of love. Because I'm loved, I get to love others, not I'm supposed to love people because it's the right thing to do.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think too, like, we're not going to do it perfectly every time. Yeah. And you and I both were friends with Jason Johnson, but his blog is so great. And I remember one of his blog posts being about, you know, we take that scripture verse, like, good, well done, good and faithful servant. Mm-hmm. And right, it doesn't say in the Bible, good and successful, parent that's crushing it, parent that's got the kid doing everything perfectly. It says faithful. And so I think that just means showing up faithfully again and again, even when we're tired. And I get it. It's hard. I mean, I remember when I was counseling this little girl, her parents were addicted to drugs. She'd been removed from the home, her and her 4 siblings. And they, eventually we were not able to find a home that could keep them all together. And so she got separated from her 2 older siblings, which was really traumatic as well.
Yeah.
Because she was really close with one of them. And then she wanted to go home really badly to her parents as well. They're missing visits. Like all of this stuff is starting to compound on top of one another. And then you, as many of you probably know, listening to this, like the child welfare system is a mess and social workers are underpaid and way overworked. And so there's high turnaround. And so by the time she had been in care, maybe like 8 months, I had been the only person consistently involved in her life still at this point. And so her trauma was just off the chart. And I remember, you know, we had a counseling session and it was time to go. And it was kind of this scenario where, you know, some of you parents are listening and you're like, I know where this is going. You know, it's like she wanted a piece of bubble gum. We only had green, and that was devastating. She wanted, you know, the other color. And so that led to a meltdown. And then her shoes are hurting her feet. So that's leading to a meltdown. And you can see things spiraling. Yeah. And so we get to a point where it's the middle of winter, it's Illinois. And I'm doing my trauma informed stuff. I ask her if, you know, I give her 2 choices for going into the car. And I said, I can carry her to the car or I can hold her hand and walk her to the car. And so we agreed that I could carry her. Now, rookie mistake on my end. She wasn't wearing winter boots because her feet had hurt and we had taken them off. So I was carrying her in the middle of winter outside with no shoes on. And we got to the car and she lost it. And she starts kicking me and punching me and she's just wailing on me. And I can't put her down. Obviously, her feet in the snow would not be a good thing. And so at this point, I just need to get her back in the building. And she runs into my office and hides under my desk. And now, do I want to deal with her? No, honestly, right? Yeah. I'm just like frazzled. I'm kind of shaking because I've just been wailed on a bunch of times by a kid. And I'm like, what do I do? Right? Like how do you muster up the strength, right? And energy to be calm, to not want to go in there and be like, listen, you know, right? Like just kind of lay down the law, but knowing like, I know what she's been through. Like she doesn't, saying goodbye to me is another like traumatic. She is not, this is triggering everything that she's been experiencing the past few months. And so if I come in hot, that's not going to go well. And so I need to, you know, regroup. And I did for a second. I was like, I need a minute to just like get my bearings again, calm down. And then I went back in and re-engaged. And it can be really hard, right? When some of you parents are listening and you're in really hard trauma scenarios with your kids, it's exhausting you, you know, you know, and we're saying, do trauma informed parenting. And you're like, I've been doing it for a year, Jen, like I'm worn out, you know? And I think that is too, like where we just have to lay it at Jesus' feet and just, we cannot fast track these timelines with our kids. We want it to be resolved and it might not be for a long time. And so what do we do with that? Right. And I think laying it at Jesus' feet, wrapping support around us and our kids is really important as well. Getting those self-care times if you can. I know sometimes that feels so impossible because, you know, especially for foster parents, respite is few and far between. But what does it look like for you to receive that love as well? You know, that you're doing the best you can as a parent.
Yeah.
So
that's good stuff. Let's kind of close up here, Jen, with anything else that just you, as we speak to our listeners, and let's specifically talk to foster adoptive parents who are really navigating kids who've experienced so much. And it feels like this constant battle every day with their kids. And they are just so tired. Share with them maybe just from your heart as we close out here.
Yeah, I think, I think the one thing I'd always say is you're not alone. There's other parents who really understand what you're going through. And this is hard. And this is why resources like the Forgotten Initiative and Replanted exist, because we want you to know we see you, we love you, we care about you, and we want to wrap around you and your family as best we can, because you can't do this alone. No. It really takes a village. And I think just receiving that grace, it's okay to feel tired. It's okay to feel secondary trauma, compassion, fatigue, all those things. It's okay to question if this is the right decision, if this is the right call for your family, all those things. And our God is bigger than this. And the outcome still might not change. And so what does it look like as a parent to just surrender our desire for what we thought life was going to look like, and it doesn't, for what we were hoping for our kids. And they're just, no matter how hard you try, they're still going down these paths that feel really destructive. I think, you are loved no matter what. That was one of our conference themes a few years ago, because I just felt like parents, it's so often we're like, we can't tell people about what's happening behind closed doors with our kids or in our marriages or even just in our own spiritual lives. If people only knew this then, right? Yeah. But we wanted to change that narrative and say, if people only knew this, yes, and we still love you. Yeah. There's nothing you can do to separate yourself from the love of God. And that as believers of Christ as well, we're embodying that. And so find your people, get your, I think too, for kids, we talk about this in the book, your kids need to be with other kids who understand the uniqueness of adoption and foster care. It's not just about parent support. Your 7-year-old child who's wondering if they're going home or not needs to know other kids who are living that same degree of life and difficulty and questioning, or they don't know who their parents are or where they came from, or if they actually, what their actual birth date is. It's really important for kids to be with others who are kind of older or maybe on the other side of that processing, who can speak truth and encouragement into their stories as well. I think that's super important. So and I think, Thriving Families, this is why we wrote this resource, to encourage you but to have those really honest conversations, for us to think more deeply about what it means to parent children through adoption and foster care as well. I think those would be all my encouragements.
Thank you, Jenn. Well, I love you. You're a dear friend, thankful for the work you do, and thankful that we get to partner together.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Jamie.
Well, I hope that today's episode encouraged you wherever you are on your foster care journey. We want you to stay connected, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you will never miss an episode. Also, we have great content at theforgotteninitiative.org. Thank you for watching. I cannot wait to be with you next time.